Effective tax
But
administration
they all
fosters
start
public
with
trust.
accountability. Fiscal transparency
TADAT
means you're
isn't
doing
just
it
a
right.
tax tool.
It empowers you
build
to
your own
understand and
dynamic
build your own
revenue
dynamic
model
revenue
starts
model.
It
here.
all starts here.
Hello, everyone. Taxation is the price we pay for civilization, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. famously said. In the context of development, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala sharpens the point. Developing countries will not develop without developing their tax systems. Together, these statements deliver a clear message. Strong tax systems are the foundation of strong and self-reliant nations. Welcome to the very first episode of TADAT Talks. I'm Modeste Mopa, your host and head of the TADAT Secretariat. For over a decade, the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool has been used to evaluate the health of tax administration systems in more than 112 countries, helping them advancing their domestic resource mobilization agendas with greater confidence. Today, we explore the critical role of domestic resource mobilization in achieving sustainable development with a focus on the institutional and operational challenges of building high-performing tax systems. To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Vítor Gaspar, former Finance Minister of Portugal and now Director of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department. Together, we will explore global trends, reform strategies, and the role of international partners like the International Monetary Fund in strengthening fiscal institutions. Vítor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to engage with you on this journey of exploration.
Vítor, I'm honored and excited to hear your thoughts on why building strong institutions in general and tax systems in particular is so challenging yet so crucial for our collective well-being.
Modeste, there are simple ways and complicated ways to address your question. I find it useful to relate your question to two fundamental ideas from Joseph Schumpeder. This is something which Schumpeder did explore right at the beginning of his career, even before he was a finance minister in Austria, and much before he came to the United States and Harvard. And in 1918, I believe, he wrote a paper called The Crisis of the Tax State. And that was something that was motivated by the difficulties that Austria was facing in the post-World War I environment. In that paper, Schumpeder argues that tax is the financial instrument that distinguishes the state from other forms of human organization, and it's the defining instrument of the modern state. Before the tax state, there was a confusion between the finances of the state and the finances of the sovereign as an individual. It is the tax state that shapes the modern form of government, and that is something which is so strong for Schumpeder that he quotes a sociologist, also from Austria, Goldscheid, saying that the budget reflects the history of a state naked from all meaningless ideologies. So for him, the tax shapes the state. It's the crucial force for the modern state. It's a fundamentally political phenomenon. First fundamental idea of Schumpeder. There's a second. The second is that our prosperity requires entrepreneurship, requires innovation, requires technological progress, which is made first and foremost by private sector entrepreneurs. But these entrepreneurs need finance. And in order for the entrepreneurs to have access to finance, it's crucial that public finances are solid and that the Treasury is able to issue government bonds as safe assets as a pillar for financial development and financial stability.
Vítor, you've talked about various sources of financing states and countries. When FAD, the Fiscal Affairs Department, advises IMF member countries, is there a certain source that FAD emphasizes more? And if so, what's the thinking behind that?
So in the first idea from Schumpeder, tax is completely different from other sources of government revenue because revenue from property is something that private corporations do. Exploration of natural resources is something that mining companies do. State-owned banks, well, the financial system, the banking system, are in many countries completely dominated by private agents. It is taxation that makes the state different. We have done some research in the last 10 years that does suggest a very strong role for taxation. In particular, in FAD about 10 years ago, we were able to identify a tipping point for taxation above which, because the state is able to perform its functions in growth and development, above the tipping point, you actually see an acceleration in economic growth. And now I'm very pleased to say that that research has been revisited and has been reproduced last year by colleagues from the World Bank and this year by two colleagues from the Fiscal Affairs Department, Matteo Bellon and Ross Warwick. Do you want me to summarize their findings for you?
Maybe before summarizing it, Vítor, I would like to hear more about your view on this tipping point, because I'm sure our viewers out there would like to understand what's really at stake. So could you tell us what the benefits are for a country approaching what you mentioned as a tipping point?
But that's precisely what Matteo Bellon and Ross Warwick have documented in my view, a brilliant way. So 10 years ago, we identified the tipping point, and to the right of that tipping point, we had an acceleration of growth. Ross and Matthieu have reproduced those results, but they have done much more. They were able to use a methodology to look at the time series of the process. And they saw that in a way which is completely independent from the tipping point, the estimated impact on growth over 10 years was 10%, a very large number. But they went further, and they went to distinguish between countries that basically crossed the tipping point, but stayed at around the tipping point and would have multiple crossings. They would go up and down the tipping point, and countries that steadily persevered in increasing their tax capacity, their tax to GDP ratio. And this group of countries, after 10 years, would be approaching 15% of GDP in the tax to GDP ratio. So after 10 years, they would be approaching 15%. They would cross the tipping point and then continue on and approach 15%. And looking only at these countries that kept going in terms of building their tax capacity, the impact on growth is doubled to 20%. And you see a steady increase in quite a number of other indicators. Not surprisingly, financial development, that's where the domestic resource mobilization comes from, the legal framework, government effectiveness, and the quality of governance. While the countries that stayed at the tipping point, going up and down the tipping point, those countries basically gain nothing in terms of growth, and their other indicators, financial development, government effectiveness, and so on and so forth, don't improve either. So the crucial thing is to cross the tipping point, persevere, and increase a comfortable level of taxation above the tipping point.
Yeah, you're talking about countries doing well, others doing not so well. Maybe, Vítor, let's take a helicopter view of the current global landscape of domestic resource mobilization. So what are we seeing exactly? Are we seeing progress, or are challenges deepening, especially for low-income countries?
So if you allow me, Modeste, let's go one step at a time. First, the landscape. If you look at the map of the world in terms of taxation, you can actually do that on the basis of IMF data. You can do that on the basis of the World Database. And people, again, in FAD have worked very hard to have that very complete data set. And I want to acknowledge the contribution from Mario Mansour, who has been a leader in this work. And when you do that and you map the landscape, you literally make a map, you see that countries that are significantly handicapped in terms of their tax capacity are concentrated in Africa, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. There are some countries in South Asia and the Pacific. There are also a few countries in Latin America and Central Asia and the Middle East. But the greatest concentration of countries is in Africa. On time series, so the evolution over time, you of course realize, Modeste, that the pandemic in 2020 was a major disturbance, and many countries lost tax revenues in the context of the pandemic, and unfortunately, for many of them, they have not yet recovered to previous levels. The trends before 2020 were not brilliant either, but the pandemic certainly was a negative shock that we are still suffering from.
So you mentioned something, Vítor, the trend was not already brilliant. At the same time, you highlighted the benefits of approaching this 15% of GDP.
Yes.
So the benefits are so huge, Vítor, that my question to you is, why is it so hard for low-income countries to meet this? What are the main barriers holding them back?
Because the process is highly political and it's holistic. It's not taxation only. It's what comes together with taxation. Transparency, accountability, good governance, government effectiveness, the rule of law, and financial development. And these various aspects have to fit together in the context of what I call the social and political contract. And you know that, Modeste. There is nothing more different around the world that the characteristics of politics are first and foremost national, right?
Absolutely.
The national dimension has primacy in politics, and therefore there are no universal recipes. What will work in a country will not work in another. It depends on history, politics, what have you.
So that makes, I guess, this makes things challenging for FAD. So, Vítor, what do you advise policymakers to build tax capacity?
So one aspect which is very important can be summarized in the sentence, find an understanding with the people. Adam Smith has a wonderful image in which he says that revenues of the state can be divided in revenues from property and other sources, and taxes on the people. And taxes on the people can be taxes on property, can be taxes on income, can be taxes on spending. But in order to get the consent of the people, you need an understanding of the people. You need the politics to be right. You need to build a social consensus around what the state is for and what the state is serving. One aspect that you in TADAT emphasize very often is the importance of quasi-voluntary compliance. And why would taxpayers pay their taxes voluntarily? Because they believe that they get value for money from their taxes, and because they believe that taxes are fair in terms of distributing the burden associated with the financing of the said expenditures. We have found in the context of the platform for cooperation on tax that the medium-term revenue strategy provides a good framework that some countries have found very useful to look at their tax system from a medium to long-term perspective, and has helped a number of countries building their tax capacity. We are now revisiting that tool to make it even more effective.
This is a really interesting point, that is having a broader effort to build tax institutions. Because my question to you, Vítor, is we've seen some initiatives in terms of enhancing tax systems. Do you think that it is possible to build a strong tax system in isolation from other state institutions?
No. No. So clearly, taxation is at the center of the structure of the state, and is it intimately linked to it. So the first idea from Schumpeder recognizes that taxation shapes the state in a very profound way, and taxation should be designed in such a way to ensure the autonomy of the private sector and civil society, while at the same time favoring complementarities between the public and private, as is clear about financial stability and financial development.
So I guess all these demand a lot of support. So my question to you is, what can the international community do to help, especially the low-income countries that are lagging?
One aspect I want to refer is the international tax system. The international tax system is often very complicated, very complex, and that creates a stress on the tax systems of countries from the developing world. And from that viewpoint, it is very important, one, that a cooperative, multilateral approach to taxation that takes into account the interests of the low-income countries is in place. So an international framework benefits all countries, especially the poorest and most vulnerable, but it requires the tax system to be simple. And Secondly, it's important to recognize that the corporate income tax is particularly important for the developing world as a source of revenues. And from that viewpoint, the peculiarities of the corporations that are most important for the tax revenues in these countries should be taken into account with particular care in the context of all international solutions. Organizations like the IMF can play a subordinated, secondary, subsidiary role, but still a very important role in finding the best technical solutions if the country so decides.
So, talking about the role of the international community, Vítor, you recently participated in the 4th Financing for Development conference in Sevilla, Spain. Can you tell us the outcome of this conference?
Yes, so the conference was organized under the aegis of the United Nations. It was hosted by the Spanish authorities. It was a very large conference. It was attended by about 10,000 delegates. 4,200 were from members of the United Nations or international agencies. There were many representatives from civil society, and it was attended by 48 heads of state or government. The opening day benefited from the presence of the King of Spain. So it was clearly an extremely high-profile conference. The conference had a conclusions document, the Compromiso de Sevilla, civil commitment, that is a long document that reflects a consensus on the broad agenda of finance for development from the viewpoint of the fund. The two most important areas were debt, and in particular sovereign debt, where there was a considerable amount of consensus, and domestic resource mobilization, tax capacity, where the consensus was even stronger. The Sevilla Compromiso includes a reference to the efforts that are necessary to bring the tax to GDP ratio to at least 15%, the number that we have been talking about during this conversation. That's in the conclusions. And there is a commitment to doubling the international community financial support to countries' efforts in the area of domestic resource mobilization, which is a very important commitment to the supporting role of the international community that we have also repeatedly mentioned in this conversation.
Absolutely, and continuing with these international initiatives to strengthen domestic resource mobilization, let's turn to TADAT now, a multi-partners diagnostic tool also. So what role has the TADAT framework played in helping countries identify and address weaknesses in their tax systems?
Modeste, allow me a personal anecdote. I joined the fund in June 2014. TADAT, now I know, but I didn't know then, started in February 2014. But for me, since TADAT was here when I joined, TADAT had always been in FAD, so I thought this must have been around for decades. I only learned later that it was a recent initiative. Now, TADAT is extremely important. In my view, in the area of tax administration, TADAT provides the gold standard. It is the standard that is used around the world to rank the performance of tax administrations and identify areas where tax administration can be strengthened by policy and organizational changes. Now, the TADAT is a partnership involving the IMF and the World Bank. It has built a community, a broader partnership with the donors that gracefully finance TADAT, but also the tax administrations that engage with TADAT, and some do self-assessments in TADAT, and the community of experts that have been trained in the TADAT methodology. And so in tax administration, I would call TADAT a global public good. Now that TADAT has celebrated its 10th anniversary, we start benefiting from repeated TADATs, and that allows for additional analysis to be possible because, for example, you can evaluate progress and what contributes more to progress. TADAT, last point. TADAT is also very much oriented towards outcomes, not inputs. And from that viewpoint, it's a look at tax administration from the viewpoint of external stakeholders. And that is absolutely precious.
TADAT is contributing to advance the domestic resource mobilization agenda through research also.
TADAT at this point in time is also a pressure tool for researchers. And we in FAD have done very good work with TADAT data. For example, one of our deputy directors, Catherine Baer, has looked at TADAT scores and the VAT gap. And one sees that countries that are performing better in terms of the TADAT score have lower VAT gaps, which basically shows that the good performance of the revenue administration leads to a stronger bottom line in terms of tax revenues. But even earlier than this work by Catherine Baer, Era Dublinoris and co-authors looked at the performance of tax administration and the quality of allocation of resources in the economy measured by the relative productivity of small and medium-sized enterprises. One of the members of the team by ERA was Mathieu Bellon, that I have already quoted, and they found that when one improves significantly tax administration, one improves significantly the quality of the allocation of resources by leveling the playing field in favor of small and medium-sized enterprises. That is really very important for the efficiency of the functioning of the economy and to enhance the quality of competition forces in the economy. So these two examples are just two examples, but they clearly show that tax administration matters, and it matters a lot. And we can document that by using TADAT in research.
That's great to know, Vítor. So, as you hinted to, we've spoken a lot about the role of the international community in supporting tax reforms. But our viewers may wonder, what's the right balance of responsibility between national authorities and external partners in building performant institutions like tax systems?
I try to make the point that this process is complex, it is difficult, it pays so much because it's profoundly national in the political, social, economic, and financial sense. So without very deep national ownership, the process is simply not possible. It's simply not possible. So it's a condition which is necessary and absolutely fundamental. Once those conditions are in place, I do think that the international community, in many dimensions, can play a secondary, subsidiary, and subordinated role, but still very important to facilitate the transition of countries that would otherwise be struggling with a lack of resources. But there is no doubt whatsoever that the primacy has to be national. In a sense, a bit like an athlete and her coach. The coach can help the runner to perform at her best, but the coach cannot run the race for the athlete. It is the athlete that is going to perform and win the race. It's exactly the same here.
That's a powerful insight, Vítor. So we've referred to reforms several times in our conversation, but how can countries balance ambition with realism in tax reforms? Do you think radical change is needed, or do you advocate for an incremental progress in tax reforms?
It completely depends. In some cases, a radical reform may work very well. For example, when there has been a political regime change. But in many cases, one needs to have it as a process and a gradual process. That will completely depend on country-specific circumstances. And I would recommend foreigners to be very modest about their ability to understand what works and doesn't work in a foreign country.
Thank you for this insight, Vítor. It's so interesting, so many things that we can get from you. But to wrap up our conversation, the Fiscal Affairs Department's main responsibility is to provide fiscal policy advice to IMF member countries. But is there something about the work of people in FAD that is overlooked, but that you wish should be emphasized?
Absolutely. So when you look around FAD, you see people that have very strong expertise, sometimes very strong expertise in some esoteric issue, but everybody cares about what happens in the real world, and everybody believes that by helping countries making good policy choices, building good institutions, one is ultimately helping people to get better lives, people to have opportunities to flourish. And if you allow me, one example. In 2020, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the time of the spring meetings, people were very much struggling about what should we do with fiscal policy. And FAD came out with a very simple phrase that said, do whatever you must to contain the pandemic, but make sure you keep the receipts. That is a powerful sentence that was made famous by the managing director of the fund, and it emphasizes two things that are absolutely crucial. You need to do whatever you have to do to contain the pandemic, because that's crucial to protect people's lives and livelihoods. But you can never forget about the budget constraint, and you can never forget about transparency and accountability. Therefore, make sure you keep the receipts. It is balance between caring about people but making sure that one uses the best means in the most effective way that I believe characterizes the passion of people in FAD.
So FAD is not just about numbers, about ratios.
It's about people.
It's about people. I'm sure that this relates to many tax officials in our audience because tax administrations also, Vítor, are perceived as numbers institutions and even money takers. So I think this is a powerful insight when we know that the ultimate goal of tax administration is to contribute to the common well-being. So thank you for this insight, Vítor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. At its core, taxation is one of the clearest signs of capable state. When a government can collect taxes effectively, it shows that it has the tools, the trust, and the systems in place to serve its people. But it also works the other way around, as Vítor highlighted it. Strong institutions make it possible to design fair tax systems and make sure everyone contributes their share. In short, tax capacity and state capacity go hand in hand. One strengthens the other. When citizens see their tax contributions translating into tangible public services, trust in institutions grows, creating a virtuous cycle that strengthens the entire social contract. Join us next time on TADAT Talks as we continue exploring how tax systems shape our societies and economies. We will be diving deeper into practical approaches that are transforming tax administrations worldwide. Until then, remember that behind every tax collected is an opportunity to build a stronger, more equitable future for all. Thank you.